Hey there, folks. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a good break and a happy Easter holiday. Today I'm going to be lecturing on Chapter 6, so please make sure you've read that in the book if you've not done so yet. For me, this is probably the most important chapter in the book in terms of the interpersonal stuff that we're talking about. The book is on relational communication and how we have good communication with those people who fill our lives. At the end of our lives, one measure may be the money we've made, how famous we are, the acclaim and the respect that we gather from the world, our level of job satisfaction and fulfillment. These are all measures of success, but I think the truest estimation of our success is the number of healthy and vibrant relationships that we create. When we look back at our life at the end of our lives, being able to say, I had a positive impact on other human beings because of the health and the energy around my relationships. So I've said this before, I want you to be great public speakers, but I want you at the end of this course to be better at your interpersonal communication. And we've talked a little bit about that in terms of what does verbal communication look like, what does nonverbal communication look like. We've talked about how we relate in groups with one another. And so this is really now today about one-on-one relational communication that none of us can do without. Once again, below I've attached some images of kind of what I would have written up on the board if I had a board, but we're not allowed on campus anymore. So you can look at those and you might want to download those before you go through the rest of the lecture. Some of them are handwritten and some of them are typed because I was just getting tired of writing, and as you all know, my handwriting is not the best. Yes, watch the lecture and then please read the rest of the assignment here on Moodle so you know what stuff you have due this week. Okay, so kind of first image, let's talk about the three different types of relationships that we are all in that kind of fall in three categories. We start with sort of the least intense, which we call acquaintances. Acquaintances are people with whom we have limited interactions on a regular or semi-regular basis. So this could be people who are in your classes but who you aren't particularly friends with, folks who you say hello to on your hall, in the dorms. Acquaintances might be people who come to the place where you work fairly regularly. So if you wait tables, and these are sort of your regular customers who you see here and there. So these are acquaintances. These are people who we know enough that they aren't complete strangers, and they require some level of us being civil with them, but they aren't sort of like the most important people in our world, or even what we would term friends. Those are our acquaintances. Second level of relationships is what we call our friends. These are folks who we're more personally involved with, both in frequency, how often that we see them, and duration, kind of how long we've known them. So these could be friends that you've known from back home. These could be folks who you met in school, who you progressed through elementary and high school with. This could be the group of folks who you meet your freshman year of college, and you kind of travel in that friend group over the course of time of your 4 years in college, luckily, if you're only in college for 4 years. This could be teammates, right? People who you have a little bit more close connection with. The conversations tend to be a little more deep or a little bit more personal than they would be with just acquaintances. And these are friendships that kind of weather and stand the test of time. Last, we would talk about a group of people that we call our intimates. Our intimates are what we call sort of like our inner circle, those few people who are closest to us. These are the people that we share our deepest thoughts with, that we let into our feelings and our emotions. If you remember the proxemics of house, these are the people who are upstairs in the bedroom. These are people who teach us lessons and cause us to value people in all of their complexities, because these are the people who we've sort of weathered the storm with. We've had fights, we've had conflicts, but we figured out how to work it out, which has just increased the trust and increased the honesty and authenticity in relationship. This is where we put best friends. Some of you may put family members here if you are close with those family members. Some of you may put your significant other, boyfriend or girlfriend, in this category. These are folks who we allow to sort of know us the best and who we attempt to know the best. So you can think of this as almost three concentric circles, with acquaintances being here, kind of friends being here, and then intimates being here. These also sort of loosely apply to kind of the front doorstep of our proxemics diagram, kind of down in the kitchen, and then upstairs in the bedroom. There's no value judgment on any of these. Truthfully, we all need people in all three of these categories. And I should say, these categories are not always fixed. A lot of times there's movement in these categories over time. So we might have someone who is an acquaintance, and we start to hang out with them more, spend more time together. We find that they become a friend. Eventually, we realize that they are someone who we can trust, and we begin to share some of our deepest thoughts and feelings and emotions. They move from friend to intimate. It can also work the other way. Sometimes we have folks who are intimates who don't keep a secret or prove themselves to not be worthy of the trust. And it doesn't cause a huge fight, but we sort of downgrade them maybe to the friend category because we realize that having them in that intimate circle was not kind of mutually beneficial for both of us. So these are the acquaintances, the friends, and the intimates, and be thinking about how it's necessary to have people in all three of those categories. Next thing I want to talk about is something called the circular stages of relationship. The circular stages of relationship are a good way of thinking about how we progress and how we show ourselves in each of these relationships. So there's a diagram that I gave you, and we'll start with the first stage of these relationships, which is called the sparkle stage. The sparkle stage is whenever a relationship is new and everything is kind of happy and sparkly. Sometimes this is called the honeymoon period in a relationship. This is where we are kind of just completely enamored with a new friend that we've made. Sometimes this is the beginning of a dating relationship where all we can think about is how much time we want to spend with this person. They're wonderful. We're kind of having them fill our every thoughts. The sparkle phase can also happen in the beginning of a new job, when you get somewhere and you've just come from a terrible job, so now you're like, oh, this is so great to be here, my boss is awesome, my coworkers are awesome. That's the sparkle stage of relationships. Every relationship goes through this, and it's a good place to be. In general, during the sparkle phase, we are sharing what we call our partial self. So think about the first time you go on a date, right? You put on your best outfit. Guys, you probably hopefully shave maybe or clean up and just don't look scraggly. Ladies, you probably do makeup. And we are presenting our best self to whoever that person is. When you go for a job, first day of work, you probably dress in a certain way and you're probably very on top of things that look very different from sort of how you behave a year into that job. So we call this the partial self because we are really putting our best foot forward. We're putting out, this is what we look like at our best, this is how we behave at our best, this is how we speak at our best, this is how we act at our best. But in reality, we know that we can't all act the best 24/7. And this is why we call it our partial self, because we're really trying to put best foot forward during this sparkle stage. The next stage is called the conflict stage. This occurs in every single relationship. We've talked about before, conflict is not a bad thing, not to be simply avoided. So conflict self, obviously, is when the sparkle stage is over and we start to rub up against each other. We have disagreements with our boyfriends or girlfriends. We find that there is tension with a friend when a third friend gets introduced into the mix. We start to realize that sometimes our boss's policies seem to be unfair, or our boss finds that we do not work as quickly or as efficiently as he or she thought we would. In the conflict phase, that's where relationships start to rub against each other. And in this phase is where we start to talk about the authentic self. The authentic self is the real you. And what I mean by the real you is it's the good parts of you, but it's also the parts of you that are maybe a little less flattering. Bad habits, pet peeves, the way that you get bugged by other people, the way that other people start to bug you. When we say authentic self, it means we're not just showing that best 20 to 30%, we're starting to show our whole 100%. And a lot of times when we are in conflict phase in relationships, unfortunately, what happens is that conflict cannot be solved, and what happens is the relationship then breaks apart. If, however, we stay in that conflict and we work through it, we move to the third stage in the circular stages of relationships, which we call the resolution. The resolution stage is where whatever that conflict is gets worked out. We start to have open and honest conversation with our boyfriend or our girlfriend or our friend and say, hey, like it really hurts me or it really bugs me when you do this. And they say, hey, that's great. I'm doing this and behaving that way because I thought this. And then you say, oh, no, I didn't mean this, I meant that. We start to have open and honest and authentic conversation. And we start to figure out, how do we speak better to one another? How do we behave better to one another? How do we better love for and care for one another? And that leads us into the resolution stage, where we kind of work through it. In the resolution stage, what we start seeing is something called the enhanced self. And this just means that if we stay in a relationship and if we work at that relationship, in an ideal world, in an ideal relationship, that conversation, that dialogue, that resolution ends up making us better people. We become more patient, we become more kind, we become more sensitive or attuned to what our friend or our boyfriend or girlfriend or family member needs from us. And in theory, that relationship is sharpening and honing us. I'm sure we've all had the experience of being in a relationship that makes us better, and I'm sure we've also had the experience of being in a relationship that doesn't make us better. So ideally, when these stages are working right, we are finding that we become more enhanced on some level. Now, if you'll notice in the diagram I gave you, we then go from resolution back to sparkle. We call these the circle stages of relationships because they never end. So once we come to that resolution, and we've all had this experience, and we're like, oh my gosh, we're better people, this relationship is better, we kind of go back to another sparkle stage where it's like, things are great. And they're even maybe greater than before because of how we're both growing and changing and developing. And then eventually a conflict happens again. This is natural. This is how relationships work. So we should not be afraid of the cycle. In fact, we should maybe start asking questions of like, are we always in the sparkle phase? That doesn't necessarily seem real. Are we showing each other enough of each other? Maybe we need to dig a little deeper into our authentic selves to find where there are areas of conflict. If we're always staying in the conflict phase and never moving to resolution, never moving to enhanced selves, then maybe we need to be asking the question, like, is this relationship helpful and healthful? Because in theory, we want to be always cycling through these circular stages of relationship. So that's how those work. Like I said, they're ongoing. There's not really a place where we're always sitting. And sometimes, depending on different areas of the relationship, we may be sitting in different parts of those stages at the same time. But this applies to romantic, friendships, family relationships, team relationships. In general, it can go in many different directions. So make sure you understand that. Next bit of notes that I want to talk about. I'm really bummed that we're not in person because this is actually a really fun lesson because we do a lot of performing of these principles. But hey, it is what it is. These are 13 principles of healthy relationships that I want to make sure you know and understand. So we'll just walk through them pretty quickly here. Some of these are in your book. Some of these are not in your book. Some of them are just from me. First, relationships are not perfect. No relationship is perfect at all. And a good kind of percentage that people use is this 80-20. If you are in a healthy relationship, your healthy relationship is a lot of the time, at least 20% of the time, going to involve conflict. People think that healthy relationships mean that we just never fight, things like that. Not true at all. In fact, if you're not fighting and if you're not having these conversations, sometimes you have to ask yourself, are we afraid of conflict? Are we avoiding it? What's that all about? So no relationship is perfect. That's okay. But you should be making sure that when you do have conflict, you're working through it. 2, no single relationship will give you everything. This is a danger that I see a lot of young people get into, where we look for one person to fulfill everything. We want this person to be our best friend and our intimate and our boyfriend or girlfriend. We want them to make us feel better about ourselves. We want them to be our advocate. And you put too much pressure on any one relationship. No single relationship will give you everything. I see this a lot of times when people start dating and they immediately stop connecting to their other friends that they had before that or their family because they put all of their eggs in the basket of this new wonderful boy or this new wonderful girl. It puts too much pressure on that person to be everything, and they cannot. No human being can give you everything, right? On the flip side, it also sets you up for failure, because what happens if that person disappears or exits your life? Then you are left not having nurtured those other relationships that you have, not having connected to anybody else. So we really want to make sure that we spread out our affection, we spread out our love, we spread out our desires, we spread out our need among multiple people, so that that single relationship doesn't have too much pressure. It's like when you have a bridge and you try and put too many cars on it, or you have an elevator and you put too many people into it. It breaks, doesn't work. Third principle, relationships will die if not nurtured. This should be self-evident, but unfortunately sometimes it isn't. You will get out of a relationship what you put into a relationship. And if both people are not nurturing that relationship, the relationship will die. So nurture means fun times together. It means laughter. It also means serious conversation. It means gifts. It means spending quality time together. It means giving words of affirmation. But finding out how the person that you are in a relationship wants to be loved for, wants to be loved, wants to be cared for, and figuring out how to nurture that. If any of you have been in a relationship where it's always one-sided, you're the one doing all the phone calling, you're the one doing all of the texting, you're the one making all the plans, you realize that it's just not fun if the other side is not also nurturing. Next principle, relationships are both painful and pleasurable. And there's a quote there that says, grief is the price that we pay for loving. This just means that, you've heard the quote also before, you always hurt the ones you love. Unfortunately, this is true. When we have someone in our lives that we care about and we put a lot of stake in that relationship, often our emotions can get higher about it. So very often, these relationships will be the things that bring us the most joy, and when things are not going well, these are the relationships that will bring us the most pain. This is not an excuse for avoiding these types of relationship. It's something about life that we all need to learn to weather and accept, that any true relationship is going to bring both sides of the coin and the equation. A lot of us, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, shut ourselves off from a relationship because we are afraid of the pain. But when we are afraid of the pain, we also don't get to experience the joys. And so we just live at sort of equilibrium here in the middle. And that's no way to live either. So just a principle to accept is that those relationships are going to be both painful and pleasurable, and that's okay. Relationships require flexibility. Again, maybe common sense, but sometimes we don't live it. Relationships require both parties to be willing to change and to compromise and to transform and grow. Going back to the circular stages, if you are always the one who is compromising in the conflict phase and you are growing and changing, but your friend or your partner or your family member is not, chances are this is not a relationship that is equal, and it's not going to probably last very long because both parties need to be flexible. Sixth principle, relationships, especially in the digital age, require wisdom and discernment. What this means is now that a lot of relationships are conducted online, it requires that we be very wise and pay attention and be very discerning. As we know, anybody can hide behind the anonymity of a social media profile or a dating app profile. We can very often lie through text about where we are. And so, especially in the digital age, it requires that we be very smart about who we're befriending and be very careful about who we're befriending and what we tell them about ourselves, what we let them know about ourselves, until they have demonstrated the willingness and the capability to actually interact and hang out with us face to face. At the worst, this can lead to us being lied to and deceived. At the worst, it can lead to us being put in dangerous situations with folks who are pretending to be something that they're not. Principle 7, relationships require vulnerability to know and be known. This is very hard for us sometimes, but the way that we get to know other people is to very slowly figure out how do we disclose to them, let them know who we are, and invite them to do the same. You all really know the great feeling when you find someone that you can trust, who you can be open and intimate with, and you know also how wonderful it feels like to be trusted when someone shares that vulnerability. A lot of times guys, especially, we feel like we have to have this sort of like macho, tough exterior where we don't talk about our feelings, we don't talk about our fears and insecurities. And very often the message that that puts out is that we don't need anybody, which never feels good to our friends, to our family members, to girlfriends. So all relationships require vulnerability, and they require vulnerability on both sides. Number 8, a healthy relationship will enlarge and not diminish you. Going back to the very beginning of the semester, if you are in a relationship that is enlarging you, that is making you become a better person, that is making you see gifts and talents that you never knew, that is making you feel loved, that is making you feel supported, that is making you feel like you have capacities and powers beyond what you thought, this is a good relationship. This is a relationship that enlarges you. If you're in a relationship that makes you feel less about yourself, that makes you feel small, in which you feel belittled or picked on or put down or diminished, this is not a good relationship. And so many of us put up with relationships in our lives that diminish us, that we don't need to. And then maybe we think that if we let this relationship go, we won't have another relationship. Or if we don't have this friend in our life will fall apart. Or if we let a parent or a sibling talk to us in a certain way, that's okay because they're family. It's not. And on the flip side, if we are diminishing someone else, we need to think about why that is. Is it because we don't really want to be in this relationship? Is it because we have some of our own insecurities? But healthy relationships across the board will be enlarging and not diminishing. A healthy relationship should offer reciprocity and equality. We've already sort of talked a little bit about this, but if I'm in a relationship with a friend or a family member or a romantic relationship who doesn't put me as an equal, that's a problem. If they treat me like I'm less than or subservient to them, that's not healthy. Now, sometimes we are in work relationships that already have that because somebody is the boss and somebody is the employee. But that boss still needs to see the employee equal in terms of we're all human beings, and we all have feelings and we have emotions. So I can have someone who might be structurally above me, but should still treat me with the respect and dignity and compassion and empathy that another human being deserves. And reciprocity is a fancy word that comes from reciprocal, meaning I'm putting in this much in a relationship, and the other person should be putting in equal. This is a big danger for me. I often put so much into relationships, and then I'm like, this other person doesn't care as much as I do. Some of that is about me sometimes caring too much and me needing to learn to kind of back up and ease off a little bit. Sometimes that's me asking this person to do a little bit more and say, hey, this is what I really need from you in this relationship. So reciprocity can be a really interesting dance where we both have to kind of monitor how much we are putting in, and also sometimes having to ask for more or less from the other person, because we all do relationships very differently. A healthy relationship allows its participants to be both individuals and part of a unit. Many of you have had this experience. If you think of the movie Mean Girls, where you become part of a friend group, and all of a sudden there are all these new rules that you have to follow, and you don't get to be yourself because this new friend group is trying to change you into something else. Or you start dating a guy or a girl, and they want so much of your time, and they get jealous when you spend time with other friends. These are not healthy. The best types of relationships allow you to feel like you are part of a friend group or part of a relationship, but also still allow you to maintain your individuality, your own hobbies, your own activities, your own friends, your own schedule, etc. And finding and how to figure out that delicate balance is very difficult. But if you are in a relationship that is asking you to just be part of this group and not have an individual identity anymore, get out of it fast. A healthy relationship requires continual work and effort. Yeah, I don't need to say much more about that, right? Like, you don't put anything into it, you're not going to get anything out of it. You just stay in one phase and you kind of never move and change and develop. Relationships change you, and that's okay. Don't fear it. A lot of us find, especially in romantic relationships, that all of a sudden when we're dating, we realize, oh my gosh, this is sort of making me into a new person. I find this a lot. I am, in my life, not a very verbally lovey person, right? I don't give a lot of compliments. I don't give a lot of like sweet language because I sometimes distrust words. And I'm like, well, why do I need to say all these things when I can just show someone that I care about them by doing things for them, right? But a lot of times when I start getting in a relationship romantically, I find myself starting to be like, oh, you're beautiful and you're wonderful. And a lot of times I look at myself and be like, oh my gosh, who am I right now? This is not me. And that's okay. A lot of times it takes someone else in your life to kind of bring something out of you that's not there. And the best relationships are going to love you right where you are at, but also are going to challenge you to change and become an even better person, that enhanced self that we were talking about. So don't fear that. A lot of times good relationships, be they friendships or family relationships or romantic relationships, start to make us feel like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of out of sorts. Like this is really kind of doing something different in me. Not necessarily a bad thing. Now, make sure that it's changing you for the better, right? If it's not changing you for the better, that's not okay, and it is something you should fear. But if it's changing you in a way that you're growing and all of a sudden life feels kind of different and you're splashed in cold water for the first time, relax. You will acclimate to the temperature and you'll learn how to swim. And last but not least, relationships require conflict. We've said this a million times before. A great relationship doesn't mean it's a relationship where we don't fight. In fact, if we don't fight, then maybe there are some things that we're not talking about. What is healthy is then to figure out ways to work through and resolve that conflict. So those are our 13 healthy principles. You've got those there in front of you, so you can review them. I kind of talked through them a little quickly, but hopefully that all made sense, and we can review those as you get closer to the end of the semester and you get ready for exam. All right, 2 more things I want to talk about today. First, I want to talk about 4 conditions for a healthy relationship. 4 conditions for a healthy relationship. These are 4 pretty important words, and it'll make sense to you based on all the principles that we've talked about. First condition for a healthy relationship is connection. For a healthy relationship to occur, there needs to be connection between the 2 people. And specifically, that connection means that we need to move away from just thinking about me to thinking about we. Okay? That means learning to become not self-centered, but becoming other-centered. And sometimes when 2 me's become we run into connection that forces us to yield a little bit, to submit a little bit, to be willing to compromise a bit. And that's how we keep connection. That's how we stay a we instead of just 2 separate me's. So think about connection as the movement from me to we, as the movement from being self-centered to being other-centered, and to learning how to yield and submit so that we can stay together. Second condition for healthy relationship is what we call openness. Openness meaning once I realize that you are trustworthy, that you care about me, that you have my best interests at heart, that I know that I am now able to self-disclose to you. I can share some of my private thoughts. I can share some of my private feelings. I can be open and honest about the way that you make me feel good. I can be open and honest about the way that you hurt me and make me feel bad. And part of openness is that self-disclosure is mutual. Both people are doing that. We all know what it feels like to be in relationship with someone who's kind of closed off. Doesn't feel great. Many times we've been the person who have been closed off, and we leave the other party kind of dissatisfied. So we have connection, we have openness. Third condition is we have nurturance, and nurturance is just that we are both nurturing and taking care. We are, over time, continuing to do the things that communicate love to our friend. We are spending time together. We are offering gifts if we know that gifts do the trick. We are giving verbal encouragement. We are there when times are tough. We are there when times are good. We are actively making time in our schedule for one another. This is nurturance. Think about it taking care of a plant. You don't give a plant water, sunlight, fertilizer, healthy soil, it dies. So nurturance is doing all of these things. Fourth condition for a healthy relationship is discovery. That means that we don't just stay in one place. We continue to find out new things about each other. We continue to explore the world together. We continue to find out things about ourselves that we wouldn't have found out if we weren't in a relationship. Oh my gosh, I have the ability to be kind of jealous. I was never aware of that before because I never cared about someone this much before. Now I need to start thinking about what do I do to kind of keep that jealousy in check, right? So it's growing. It's discovering new things about the world, about each other, about ourselves, and growing. And it means that we also rejoice in and are excited in the discoveries that the other person is making. We are not threatened by the other person kind of growing. So a good way to think about this, if we want to do all our hands together, me and we, right? First, connection, openness, right? Because we're being open to each other. So connection, openness, nurturance, that's a stupid thing, but this is the tending and the growing of the soil, right? And then discovery, like looking out at the world together, finding out new things, finding out things about ourselves, finding out about ourselves internally, and then growing together. Connection, openness, nurturance, discovery. 4 conditions for a healthy relationship. The last thing that I want to talk about is, we've talked a little bit about vulnerability. We've talked about openness and self-disclosure. I want to talk just a little bit about what healthy self-disclosure looks like. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I find that folks in college, especially around your age, fall into one of 2 camps. One, and this is very often guys, but it's not just gender-based. We don't do any self-disclosure. These are the people who are closed off, who decide, I don't want anyone to know me that well because I'm embarrassed or ashamed, or talking about feelings is like really weak, and so I'm just going to pretend I'm independent and strong and kind of keep it all to myself and do no self-disclosure, no vulnerability. The other extreme, this sometimes tends to be women, but again, is not completely gender-based, is folks who are so desperate for connection that they just share everything from the beginning, right? The first time you meet them, you know their whole life story, you know their whole deepest, darkest secrets, because they so badly want to be connected to someone. Either of these extremes are not healthy. Over here, you end up not connecting and relying to anybody because you're so closed off. And ultimately, we are not intended to be islands unto ourselves, right? We're told in Genesis that it was good for men and women to be in connection with one another. So the danger here is that we end up alone. The danger on this side, where we just do too much self-disclosure too fast, is that we end up giving too much of ourselves away to people who are not trustworthy and have not proven themselves to be worth the pearls and jewels of our inner life, and they don't take care of us well. So what we want to do is find somewhere in the middle, which is healthy self-disclosure. How do we do that? So first off, we just want to make sure, in terms of healthy disclosure, that we're picking the right person. Choosing someone who is significant to us, right? Acquaintances or strangers are probably not the place for self-disclosure. Friends who we feel like we can trust, friends who have proven themselves already to be folks who are going to be with us for the long haul, who bring emotional health into our lives, who have proven themselves to be trustworthy. These are the people who are the right people, who are the significant people to disclose to. Somebody we just met online is not a great place for healthy self-disclosure. A friend who we've known for a year and we have started to hang out more together and spend more time together, this is probably a good choice, right? A relative who is verbally or physically abusive, not healthy self-disclosure. A relative who maybe is not in our immediate family, but has proven themselves in their own family, their immediate family, to be trustworthy, maybe is a good person to self-disclose to. Second, once we have found that right person or that significant person, start with safe, low-risk disclosures, right? Tell some of the things, maybe not your most deep, violent feelings, but here are some of the things that I feel. Little disclosures, right? Maybe not your deepest, darkest secrets or those things that are most cherished or important to you, but things that are maybe some of the things that you would tell some of your closest friends, but that not everybody knows, right? So think about what are those safe, low-risk disclosures that you can put out there. See how the person deals with those, and then if they deal well, then perhaps you start kind of moving further along. Third, you want to make sure that you're weighing the risk with this person. Is it reasonable? Meaning, what is the risk of self-disclosure with this person? What's the worst thing that can happen? What's the best thing that can happen? This is where the internet often becomes kind of tricky because sometimes we disclose things on the internet and then we find out that that person is not a good place for self-disclosure. And the way we find out is that they begin sharing a secret or sharing an image widely when you ask them to keep something private. So just figure out the risk. Does this person seem trustworthy? If they take care of my self-disclosure badly, what's the worst thing that can happen? If they take care of my self-disclosure well, what's the best thing that can happen? And then fourth, make sure that you're matching the disclosure person to person. Meaning, look at what they're disclosing to you and try and match them in that, right? If they are someone that moves slow, don't freak them out by telling your whole life story at once. Try and move at the same pace as they are. If they are someone who moves pretty quickly and you deem that they are the right person and a healthy person and that the risk is low, be willing to share as much as they're sharing with you. Don't fall into either of the problems of, A, don't give it away for free, right? And don't give too much that you freak the other person out. But also, if you notice that that person is trying to disclose with you, don't be stingy and don't hold it to yourself. Yeah? So that's healthy self-disclosure. Making sure you pick the right person, making sure that you begin with safe, low-risk disclosures, making sure that you're weighing the risk with that person, and making sure that you are matching disclosure person to person. This is such a good chapter, and we could talk about this all day because I said there are some really great life lessons here. Two more things I want to make sure you understand from this chapter, which are on your study guide for the final, which I gave you back at midterm. Make sure that you're looking for the statements about how to maintain healthy relationships, and make sure you are familiar with the AAA method about how we work through forgiveness and how we work through conflict. Those are two things that I consider pretty important that you are likely to be questioned about on the final exam. I think that's enough for today. We've got about 40 minutes or so. So I hope this has helped, made some sense. Like I said, these are very important lessons to me, and I always love talking about them more. So if you have any sorts of kind of relational quandaries that you're going through now that some of these principles apply to, I hope that you will try and apply them. And if you have more questions, always feel free to call or email. I'm not doing anything, as I'm sure you're not doing much of anything either. So watch this. Please read below. You're going to have 2 assignments this week that you need to turn in by this Saturday at midnight, so make sure you're doing that. And then those of you who are speaking, we will start the storytelling speeches on Thursday, and below it talks a little bit about that schedule as well. Okay? Hope you're doing well and holding up okay. See you soon.